So I want to ask you a special favor. This is the only teaching portion of our day, but again, it's what Michelle asked me to share. It's a couple concepts. It'll take me 20, 30 minutes or an hour and 30 minutes. I don't know. But truthfully, guys, does it really matter if it takes an extra 30 minutes? We're trying to accomplish something. And I don't need to hear myself talk because I hear that all the time. And so, but really, I'm hoping to impart something to you that if there was only one in this audience who took it, I would lock arms with them and fight to the death to defend it. So I'm hoping there's more than one. So stay with me. Be present. What I mean by that is don't think about what you have to do this afternoon. Discipline your mind to be present. Don't think about any challenge you had when you came here. Just be present. I wear a watch now to remind me of this, which I'm going to show you later. But on the watch face, everything is covered up to the left of the present moment, and it says the past. And everything is covered up to the right, and it says the future. And the only thing you see is the present. It's all you have. And so be present at this moment. Discipline your mind. Be open to new information. Most of the people, because you're friends of ours, have a pretty good God grid, except my friends who are atheists who are here. Where are you? We'll flog you later. Where's Mike? No, I tease him. But that's fine too. I've got a lot of great atheist friends, and we have some great God discussions, and they sharpen me like iron sharpens iron. And so be open. But one of the things that's interesting in Christendom, Jesus had this same challenge. Has anyone ever heard this phrase? You know what, that just doesn't line up with what I've been taught, so I can't receive it. Then are you all-knowing? Because that means you can receive no new information on any topic. And so the traditional way we look at things render the new words you're hearing to no effect because we summarily reject them and murder them as an alternative. And so Jesus had to pound on this, right? Because his presentation of what people thought was the gospel, would you all agree, was fairly obtuse compared to the traditions of the day? And so be open to receive. You don't have to believe a single thing I say. In fact, you shouldn't take my word for anything that I say. Because I'm a man, Michelle and I were humans, we could miss it, but you should search it out for yourself and prove us wrong. Make sense? And so Jesus would say often, you don't have to believe me because I say I am who I am. You should believe what? The work I've done and the evidence that proves it's true. And so that's all. Michelle and I have a 20-year history you can look into. Many deep friendships who can validate the things I'm talking about. But that doesn't have to be enough. Search it out for yourself. You're going to feel like a fire hose, getting fed with a fire hose, but that's okay. Let it wash through you. Just examine, if I share an experience that's outside your grid, don't worry about the dream or the vision. My experience is irrelevant. What should we look at? The fruit. What did it produce? It's the only way to know. Jesus said you could tell a good tree by the fruit, not how it was planted, not who tended to it, the fruit it produced. So just examine the fruit, check your spirit, and then ask yourself, do I know this? Am I doing this? And what would be the evidence if I was actually doing this? It's true. That was the standard we tried to hold ourselves to. And our hope is that greater things you would do than anything we've done in our short time. Okay? So all of us loved Michelle, or we wouldn't be here. And all of us knew Michelle, or we wouldn't be here. But what does it really mean to love, to know, and to honor someone? I want to define these words a little more intently. I would normally do each one of these in an hour, and I'm going to try to do them in 10 minutes each. So I'll try to make quick work of it. But I want to make these words, especially love, by show of hands, how many want to be loved? How many want to love? How many want to do love, everyone. What is love? I surveyed 3,000 people and have never heard the actual biblical definition of love one time. And yet all of us seek it, want it, desire it. So I want to redefine the word in a way that's so actionable. If you just do it, the outcome will be love's ideal every time. So I want to make them more actionable, and I want to reveal what I would consider their supernatural power. And again, when I say supernatural, I don't mean miracle. It's just what? Natural in a super kind of way. And so to do exceedingly, God said he would do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask or imagine, right? Love would do exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask or imagine. But what if we don't do our part to contend for the highest good we can imagine? You'll never see God do his part, which is supernaturally above what you could produce on your own. And so when I think by the end of today, what you're going to see is two people who really were only captured by one idea, love, in its original etymology and meaning. And then we did it with each other, ourselves, with God, our children, and you're going to see the effects by the end of the day in the farthest reaches of every realm of culture. All of it was because all we tried to do was emulate the love of Jesus. And so I say about the person of Jesus, who was love incarnate, even if you separated him from any biblical context, give me another human that's worthy of emulating. Socrates, Aristotle, name one. I've got a lot of people that I admire and influence, but we're not marking time by their existence. We're not still talking about them 2,500 years later as a present tense reality. And the guy only lived in a 12-mile radius and only had 12 close friends. But love is transcendent. So, that said, I want to define that word, and then I want to give you a glimpse into Michelle and I's story that even maybe her parents and my parents don't know, because it was cultivated in private. Because we weren't interested in broadcasting what we were doing in private, we were interested in showing fruit that was evidence of what we were cultivating in private. And so Michelle was my zoe-life mate, which is a Greek word for the God kind of life. But she was my partner, my friend, my co-laborer, my co-explorer. I was asked by my friend Mike Martin, who's going to be here speaking later. He said, Kevin, what does it mean to be a great man? What does it mean to live a great life? I think it's important to define those if we're ever going to hit that mark. And so I want to try to do that through the lens of our story. I think our story is epic. I hope you'll agree. And I hope that our testimony will inspire you to do it again. Did anybody know that the word testimony in the Bible actually means do it again? And so, again, it's not designed to inspire you. It's designed to equip you to do it yourself and then some. Michelle and I would often say if a life was filled with moments that take your breath away, we were speechless and breathless most of the time, because we couldn't believe all the ripple effect of the life we got to experience because of mastering one simple concept. It's filled with moments that could take your breath away, that exceeded our imagination. And so today, I hope we'll laugh, cry, I'll probably wail, and then I'll just be okay. Don't try to comfort me. I just got to wail, and then I'll get up and we'll do the next thing. But I want to, by the way, is that Danny Gokey song so beautiful? I love the phrase, let the word beginning just wash over you. And then get up and take step one. And so we'll cry. I hope you'll be inspired, but more, I hope you'll learn a ton and feel like you left here with some really practical tools to do it again and even better. If love lives in you when you leave here, then the love that Michelle and I know lives on. And so that was the goal. I hope if it lives on, it gives what she suffered purpose beyond just the suffering. We've been called heretics. We've been called heroes. One person asked me recently, does it mind you that one of the, certain theologian, they had organized a book burning of my book, and as they organized the book burning that particular day, a windstorm came up, and they couldn't do it because they were afraid it was going to burn the building down beside it. And so I thought it was appropriate to send a card and say, any questions? But all that to say, instead we sent a fruit basket, because at the end of the day, I understand you could be critical. I think the headline in the newspaper read, "Heresy wrapped in white gloss." And it's okay, I get it. But the point is, we don't have to agree to love each other. And so my resolve, and Michelle and I's resolve, was that we would never be in the court of the public critic. We would never point out how another person missed it or how a doer of a deed could have done it better. We would just try to be the change we were contending for and let our work and our words stand on its own. And so, heroes by some, but I no longer mind the critics. As my father in the faith would say, history never remembers the critics, guys. Who was Martin Luther King's critics? Who was Martin Luther's critics? Who was Noah Webster's critics? Who was Einstein's critics? Steve Jobs. Does anyone know? No. Because it's always the fruit they produce that is the legacy, not those that criticized it. And so, do I mean that the critics don't hurt? No, they hurt. Accusations hurt. But we know how to tend to that. And so Warren Buffett is famous for saying, at least to me, he said, "You're not right or wrong because people agree or disagree with you. You're right or wrong because your premise is sound and your fruit proves it." Make sense? And so we judge our lives by the fruit. Prezi, this is my favorite quote that I asked Michelle to put on my tombstone, among one other thing. Under this, I want one phrase: he loved well. But this is what Teddy Roosevelt would say. This was inscribed on my office wall for 10 years. Originally given to me by my father in the faith as we began to challenge some of the status quo, and we started to get feedback. Did you know that Michelle and I, for over a year after Reorient came out, had death threats, people wishing us dead, had to hire private security, all because of what? The rephrasing of a biblical word? It's crazy to think, but it was real. And so it's not the critic that counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of a deed could have done better. The credit belongs to the man or the woman who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there's no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deed, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the what? The triumph of high achievement, or at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And so in the end, following this service, I'm going to rise up and push on to greater levels. And while I might be single, what I told Michelle is I'm single-minded. And so I'm going to risk more and fear less. I'm going to love more and fear rejection less. I'm going to live more fully alive and count the critics' words less worthy. That doesn't mean I don't hear them. And every time I hear them, I made a commitment to God that I would do one thing. I would listen. And if they criticized me, I would ask myself one question every time. Are they right? And if they're right, thank them, because they kept me from being in error. And if they're wrong, thank them, because God will reward me as a righteous judge for being wrongly accused. And so either way, be thankful. Do something great. But in the end, for me, if I would pass tomorrow, I would like you to play this video only at my funeral.
Doesn't matter. Hey, I don't have all the answers. In life, to be honest, I've failed as much as I've succeeded. But I love my wife. I love my life. And I wish you my kind of success.
So literally, he said at the beginning, the audio wasn't up yet, if this is full, but this is empty, you've gained nothing. We wanted to live out of a heart that was fully alive and acquire the knowledge to make it possible. I wasn't just trying to acquire knowledge to be impressive, to live a better life. And so, it's simply a matter of heart. But I loved what he said. In the end, in life, there's going to be success and failures. The truth is, professionally, religiously, I've failed as much as I've succeeded. But in the end, I loved my wife. I loved our life. And I wish you our kind of success. Regardless of how you might feel about me at the end of this day, I want you to know my feelings towards my love for you will never change. And so I want to play one more little short video, which always inspired me and Michelle.
Here's to the crazy ones, the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Love that. Best ad ever. Did you know that the closing statement is actually the biblical definition of repent? So did Steve Jobs. And so we just have to think differently. Because Jesus would say, and John the Baptist would say, repent, think differently. The kingdom of God is where? At hand, which means it's in arm's reach. But to see it, you have to develop your senses in a different way. Okay? How are we doing so far? Okay? I haven't even sobbed once. Thank you, Lord. So again, what does it mean to love? What does it mean to know? I want to define both of these words, and in final preparations to do so, I want to give you how the day is going to go. I'll teach for just a few minutes here, and then we'll create space for you to contemplate it, and I'm going to embed each moment that I consider a key piece with music, and that's very intentional. The Greeks used the word ethos, which is where we get the word ethnic, to describe the power of music to transform the heart and to transform culture. And so music has a powerful way of embedding. And so Michelle and our friends know this, I have a 75,000 song iTunes library. which is insane. And I haven't opened it since Spotify came out. So I'm sorry to all those artists that we bought that music. My artists, musicians in the rooms, I'm sorry. I'm going back and paying for music. You've convinced me. And so anyway, all that to say, the reason we did is because we anchored every special moment with a song that would memorialize it. And so now that's why I can't listen to the radio, because there's always a moment. And so I'd like to do the same for you. And then we'll take a break. We're going to take a break, 2 of them throughout this couple hours, so you'll have a few minutes. As you notice, the tables prepared on the way in. So they've been organized by segments of Michelle's life. We digitized all the photos. They're also in print. Any photo you see or you want, we will make copies of. We'll send them to you. They're yours, okay? And so in addition to a 75,000 song iTunes library, we noticed that as time went on, we had all these printed photos, and then something happened. And so Manny was saying to me, Dad, you have all these photos of Livia and Noah, but none for me. Because guess what happened? The iPhone. And so now they're all digital. And so we have a digital library of literally 2 terabytes of photos. And like, what are we gonna do with them? So Philip was helping me organize recently so that we can just display them on every screen in our house and just play endlessly. The only problem is, every one of those photos is a what? A moment captured in time. And so you can walk by and get caught up for like 30 moments. So we have to turn the TVs off at times, okay? So I wanna do that for you, that hopefully the song that we chose very intentionally will create for you the feeling we felt at that moment. Is that cool? It may take a few hours, but it's okay. So does a ball game. It's worth it, guys, okay? And then we're gonna have a video booth. CJ and Nathan, can you stand? They're gonna be moving around with cameras. Anything that you wanna share, get with them and share it, because as we produce this stuff later, we would love to have your comments to share with the world, okay? I'm gonna put myself out in ways in front of some people here that I don't know as well, and so I could look foolish, and I want you to know that's okay. I'm willing to look foolish. I'm willing to be considered wrong, and I'm willing to be considered a heretic for love's sake and for Michelle's. But she would say to me, Kevin, if you won't do it, they won't know. And if Michelle hadn't went to a Rockettes show with her mom and aunt for the first time, she couldn't have had a moment to go, I want that. So if I don't put on open display what we felt like was the most valuable thing, though private, you won't have the moment to go, I want that, if you want it at all. And so I'm gonna ask you a question. If you, in your mind's eye, close your eyes, and I want you to imagine, and by show of hands, tell me if an image comes to mind. Imagine a special forces soldier. Raise your hand if you can imagine it. An Olympic level athlete. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine a very successful, rich entrepreneur? Okay, now close your eyes. I want you to imagine a disciple. Raise your hand if an image comes to mind. Okay, open your eyes. About 15 people raised their hands. If our goal is to conform to the image of Jesus and be a disciple, wouldn't it be helpful for our children to have an image to conform to? We were created in his image. Image is everything. And so if they don't, they can be doctors and lawyers and athletes. Why? Because they can see that. But literally the only biblical grid in the entire Bible for what a disciple is like a special forces soldier, an Olympic level athlete, a rich entrepreneur. Don't take my word for it. Read Reorient, and we'll give you copies if you want. read it or search it out for yourself. Those are the metaphors. And so I want to create an image of what love looks like to the best of my ability. And so I'm just asking for a little grace and a little less judgment, though I doubt it's going to come from any bear 4 rows back. I'm kidding, just joking. But no, for real, just create a safe space because I want to do it for you. Some things are going to sound a little otherworldly. And so I want to talk about change using an equation that we use in our intensives a lot that Michelle and I really valued from one of my heroes. His name was Dr. D. Edward Deming. Does anyone know who he is? Please search the man out. One man never had a business card that said anything but D. Edward Deming, statistician, and became the most influential person in business to change the culture of business in the world during his lifetime. And hardly anyone knows his name. And so he had a change equation. He was really a statistician. And he would say, guys, for there to be change, this is the factors. A times B times C all has to be less than the cost of doing it or there'll be no change. So A is a dissatisfaction with the current. In other words, no one changes unless they're dissatisfied with the current status quo. But that's not enough to bring about change. You need B, which is a bigger vision of what's possible. Because even though you're dissatisfied, if you don't have an image of what's really possible, you don't know what to do. And even though I could paint a big image, but if I gave you no practical tools to actually do it, there would be no clear steps and no change happens. And so I'm just gonna, everything I share, I wanna try to create what Michelle and I were contending for, a vision of what's possible, and a couple little tactics. We called them life hacks that could help you bring it about, okay? Hence why we said bring notes. But if you don't have them, no worries, it's recorded. So I want to start with the supernatural power of a word, because ultimately in this forum today, I'm sharing what? Words. And I want to share something that we discovered that was so dear to Michelle and I's heart, we decided to build our entire life around it and immerse 10,000 hours in researching and preparing it as a gift for the world. And so, the supernatural power of a word. I want to ask you the question, what is a word? Note your reactions. In an intensive, I would typically give someone blue lenses because you need to put them on and do something physical to go, my gosh, I need to see through this differently because it's not what I've heard before. So note your reactions and hopefully continue, start, or stop using words differently when you leave here. Anyone ever heard these idioms? You just implant the word where it needs to be. Be a person of your. A person is only as good as their. How do you know a person is as good as their word? Because they don't say one thing but mean another. You use your words then wisely. You can have words with people. You can have a war of words, be it a loss for words, get a word of wisdom. You know, the Bible is actually called the what? The Word of God. You can break your word, have famous last words. In other words, then don't breathe a word. Will be judged, it says biblically, search this out. You know that God is not going to judge you by your actions. He's actually, by his standard for you, he says the measuring stick by which our lives are judged are by every word that proceeds from our own mouth. Why? Because if I say I'm going to do something, I'm only required to walk in the knowledge I have, not what I don't have. And so if I say I know something, I'm judged by that standard out of my own mouth. Which is why the Israelites, he would say, but you said in your own hearts, they're giants in the lands, we can't go in there. What dictated the course? Their own. So you could break your word. We could be judged by our words. So in other words, you don't want someone putting words in that you didn't speak. Or you'll end up eating your words, mincing words. But I hope that you'll hang on every word. From the word go, and like we used to say in the 80s, word? Help me, Jody. Word up? Okay. And so I want to define this, and I hope when you leave here, You'll never think about a word the same way, number one. And then I'm going to use this lens to describe the original meaning behind the word love. That is our focus today, okay? And so our love affair with words started in a dream. In the last days, God would pour out his Spirit and people would dream and have visions. And though we call the greatest men in the world visionaries or dreamers, if I share it typically in a biblical context, I'm considered a heretic. But without a vision, people perish. And so I had a dream. You don't have to believe the dream, examine the fruit, because in this dream is why I'm here with you today and why Michelle and I lived the way we did. In this dream, I was standing in a library. It looked infinite, books on one side, music on the other, and art. And Jesus walked up beside me in the dream, and I said, "What is this? My gosh, is this every book and every song and every piece of art that's ever been created?" He said, "No, Kevin, these are the ones that have yet to be. Would you like one?" Now, given that I was not a writer and not a very good one at that, I consider myself an author, not a writer. There are writers who are much better writers than me. My favorite thing about writing is the comma. I just say it, and then I add a comma, and then when I run out of lines for commas, because the paragraph's this long, I put dashes. And so, anyway, my editor loves that. So I'm standing in this room, and he said, "Would you like it, a one?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Look over there." And in this room was a stack of 8.5 sheets by 11 papers, shoulder high. And he said, "Kevin, that's every song and every book I have graced you to write." But the problem is, I wasn't a songwriter, and I'm not an author. And ironically, my greatest deficiency until I was 20 years old and never read a book was having a bit of a learning disability because I was more autographic than visual, and I never read a book hardly till I was nearly 20, which probably explains a lot to you. But I've read a lot since. And so in the dream, I see this vision, and he says, "Take one." I took the first off, and it had reorient on it. The next one said revive, rethink, react, reform, reclaim, restore. Hence the next 10 years of my life. And so I shared with Michelle, I woke up, shared with Michelle, I said, "Kevin, this is what I've graced you to do, but there's no guarantee that you will. That part is up to you. But I want you to reorient the world to the original definition of these 10 words," and he gave them to me. I woke up, I wrote them down, I shared it with Michelle, she got a witness, and we began searching these matters out because the definitions he gave me were totally different than our 20 years of Christian history before that taught us. And so I sold my business at the time, took off a year, and began immersing myself in researching and writing this book, the first book in the series, which turned out to take about 9,800 hours. So it took 3 years, not one. And at the end of it, the book was finally printed, and what you get, by the way, how many authors do we have in the room? Well, what you get as a published author when you finish this epic journey is a warehouse full of books. Because to be a best-selling author, you have to actually sell books. And so we sold a business, and then I realized I don't even know what I'm going to do with these books. I just got a warehouse full of 10,000 books. And in 1 year, the book had sold, by word of mouth only, more than 99% of most books published in the US annually. Ridiculous. We had no idea. A book about words, a dictionary of sorts. Every publisher that we met with rejected it until now. But we went out to dinner, Noah, Olivia, and I, and Michelle. They took me to a Chinese restaurant in, I almost said Shandong, China, which is where Chuck and I first met. But we went to a Chinese restaurant, celebrated, had the book, and that night, 3 years after the initial vision, I went to sleep and I was back in that room. I share this whole story for you, because as I'm back in that room, in the dream, Jesus is standing there with me, and he said, "Kevin, look at me." I said, "I'm back in the reorient room." He goes, "Why do you call it that?" "Oh, because I received reorient here." And he said, "But no, there's more." And I said, "But," and he said, "But," I said, "This is every book that's ever been art, songs that have, been published." And he said, "No, there's more I want to show you. Before I do, look at me." And he looked at me in the dream and he said, thank you. And second to Michelle saying, I do, that was the most powerful word. I would say his was the most powerful word, and second to that would be Michelle saying, I do, that I ever heard. If Jesus literally says to you, thank you, I felt honored. And so he said, now would you like your reward? I said, yeah. And he goes, see all those books? See all that music? See all that art? I said, yeah, it's all that hasn't been done yet. He goes, no, that's what other people are going to produce because of what you published. That's your gift. And literally 3 years after, still every single day, you're going to meet some of them in arts and entertainment, at the highest levels of government, in education, in religion, in family, who are creating things based upon their experience with Reorient that are changing the world far beyond what I imagined. And it's like the greatest treasure that Michelle and I ever experienced. And it's just beginning, okay? And so, hopefully you'll be inspired by what I'm sharing to produce something of immense value greater than what you already have after this day, okay? And so, what is a word that makes it so special? Let me back up here, sorry. What I want to do by defining the word is bring it into focus. Do we have any photographers in here? When you focus something, what are you doing? You're looking at it in fine detail. And so I want to look at the meaning of the word for just a moment. And then we'll continue with today. So we bring it into concentration. This poor guy almost was impeached over the definition of one word, is. I'm not pointing out of him. I like him personally. It's just what I'm saying is the power of one little word, okay? Words are the DNA of the culture that we want to shift. And so take, for example, these two issues. We just came back from DC on an epic trip recently, and think about the challenges socially that people are trying to sort out with the definition of marriage, which we're talking about here today. Where is the battle being waged? In the courtroom over the definition of the word. Why? Because as you define the words, so goes the culture. You got it? What about this one? When does life begin? We have to define life. And so it's argued in the courts what it means to be alive before the culture accepts that definition. Make sense? So why is this? What is a word? Well, words, literally biblically defined, in the Old Testament, the word means or in the New Testament rather, it literally means, the word lego or logos, it means to know, to transmit a thought or an intent. Make sense? So a word is designed to communicate a thought which contained is an intent. And so words, say it with me, are thought capsules. And so when I say a word, if I say the word sin, the whole world thinks they know what this means because immediately a thought comes to mind of what that is. But what if the thought that comes to mind is wrong? Then what got formed of them has nothing to do with the original intent of the word that's spoken. This is the problem with communication. So when I say I love you, what does that mean? Well, to the daughter who was molested by her father who said he loves her, it means something different than the loving husband. Do you see what I'm saying? It depends on your experience, what's infused in that word. So say with me one last time, words are thought capsules. But what is a thought, guys? What is a thought? Literally, biblically defined, the word thought means to form something in reality. And so a word is an intent to form something. Make sense? Very simple, but yet profound. And so, literally speaking, they are thought capsules, which is why, by the way, the Bible calls them medicine. You can take a word and it literally can be healing to your body. Has anybody ever had a word spoken over them that damaged them? Has anybody ever had a word that healed that damage? Just the power of a word. Okay? Is this okay, guys, to teach this so far? I know we're at like a kind of a memorial service, and this is odd, but you can't understand the rest of Michelle and I's journey unless we cover this point. Okay, so words are thought capsules. Words form things. And so, in the beginning, the Bible said, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Do you think this is strange? That the Word existed before? That's weird. It's like a mystery wrapped in a riddle, surrounded by an enigma. But it's in the beginning was the Word. But would it be okay if I took out the word word and replaced it with its definition? In the beginning was God's intent to form something. And his intent to form this thing was with him from the very beginning. Does this make sense? And so God could then say, let there be light, and there was what? Light, because that's exactly what he intended to form. And so literally the word God said, the word said means intended. Make sense? So let there be light, and it came to exist. Dr. Dwayne Dyer wrote a great book, which I get criticized for recommending because he's considered New Age, but don't check it out. We are entering in a new age. That's biblical. That's our term. And so he wrote a book called The Power of Intention that was based upon this verse, because God intended. And so I love the book, and Michelle and I read it many times and gave it out early on. And so in the beginning was the Word. So if you ever wanted to distort the Word of God, what would you have to do? Change the definition, and you'll change what gets formed. So this is why God could say, every word that goes out of my mouth, it will not return empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I intended. And so literally Jesus became the flesh in the Word. He was called the incarnate Word. Because why? He was the expressed intent of what God intended to form when he formed man. Okay? We okay? And so, to show this, if Adam and Eve, the very first thing that was asked of them by their adversary, it was what? Did God really? Why? Because already there was a war for the word. And already it was being contorted to keep what God intended from heaven to form on earth. There was a war to keep that from happening, and it started with words. And so this is my friend Dennis. We named him after Dennis. Did you know that, Dennis? Who sang. Dennis, and he's cute. And I like to pause here because theologically it's like it could be a little heavy, but a picture is worth 1,000. And so this should produce in all of us a little, aw, it's so cute. Because contained in this image is the intent of what it was meant to portray. It could be 1,000 words. So, you want to eat, Dennis? No? But look, what if we just added a comma? Want to eat, Dennis? The entire intent of that statement is changed by what? A comma. One is eating the dog. The other is eating with my friend. Make sense? And so biblically, this is why God said, don't add one jot or one tittle to the word. Those two words literally mean the smallest mark as to change its intended purpose. Isn't that cool? And so when we say, I love you, we mean it in a very specific way. Did God really intend? That's the question. Jesus, people were amazed because when he spoke a word, it actually performed stuff. We all would like to be that specific with our words. If you knew every word that you spoke had the power to change something, would we be more diligent about what we speak? Yes. Okay? Just about there, guys. And so, Our faith, our confidence comes by hearing the word anointed as it was originally intended. And so he said, take on the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which he called the what? Word. The way we fight things spiritually is by speaking and acting as originally intended. And so I want to show you an example because the Bible says the word of God is alive and it's active and it's sharper than any what? Double-edged sword, penetrating even to the dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow, judging what? Thoughts and intents. And so when I speak something, to the extent that it's actually biblical, it's going to find a way into you like a thought capsule and begin to compete for preeminence, to determine whether your intents line up with that intent. We call it conviction when they don't. Make sense? And so when you see the phrase double-edged sword, what image comes to mind? A two-sided sword? That's what I thought. Jack Nevels, could you join me, please? But as I began to search this out, it actually does not mean double-edged, like two-sided. It means dual purpose. And so words have a dual purpose. And so I'm about to show you what a double-edged sword looks like. This was called a makira. It's a short forearm-length knife. Come on up, Jack, and grab this microphone over here. It's a makira, and this is compared and contrasted to, in the Old Testament, it says that there was an angel set outside the garden, and he had a flaming sword. That sword is called a cherub, which is why they're called cherubim. But this is what we were given. It's for up close, personal, hand-to-hand combat. This is a double-edged makira. And it was actually handmade by my friend here, which I'm going to introduce for me. And so notice that it's sharp on one side and blunt on the other. Why? Because the words we use always have dual purpose. They can be used to cut and hurt, or if someone is hurt, this could be superheated and used as a lance to heal. And so words can either heal or cut. But who decides how it's wielded? Us. Because this is what we were given. You can cut people down with a thought, with a word that you speak to them, and wound them until someone else comes along with a word to heal them. Make sense? And so I want Jack to explain briefly. This you're going to meet later is one of our ring bearers. Jack is a world-class Special Forces soldier, the highest ranking E9 you could be. I won't even tell his story because you wouldn't believe it. But we became friends. We met. Jack was actually diagnosed with leukemia originally. We met, and God miraculously healed Jack. He never saw any further treatment. We become best friends, closest friends. A week after Jack was healed, Michelle was diagnosed. And so he's been a special part of our journey fighting for her healing. But I want him to share why he gave this and why he makes knives for his soldiers.
This thing on? Can you guys hear me? You know, I was thinking about making of this knife, something I wanted to do for Kevin, but it wasn't just for Kevin, it was for their mission. And Kevin and Michelle were one flesh.
Mic up a little.
You guys, they were together, they were one flesh. They're one and the same. And you know, there's so many stories in the Bible about a sword. Jesus said that if you don't have a sword, sell your script and your wallet and go buy one. So I was assuming he meant an actual makira sword, not the sword of the Spirit. The making of a sword is a rough process when you hear the words.
Tell him how you learned to make those.
Well, my colonel in Special Forces actually got me making swords, and so I was about to go over to Iraq, and he said, hey, when you get over there, you know, you'll have some time. And so I brought all my stuff and actually started making swords when I was deployed to Iraq. And I would use the truck springs out of vehicles that have been blown up on the battlefield to make knives out of. But, you know, as iron sharpens iron, we always think of that as a nice, clean, smooth process, but it's not. Iron sharpening iron, there's a lot of sparks, a lot of heat. You get a lot of holes burning your clothes because of the slag coming off of it, and it's not a pretty process. And, you know, just as couples sharpen one another, that conflict that you have between each other, that's very similar to iron sharpening iron. It's a rough process. And so, you know, we would take, the first thing you'd have to start with a good piece of steel. You'd have to have good character, good quality in a piece of steel. And then we would forge it out. It goes in a furnace of sorts. We call it a forge, and it gets it red hot. And then we actually beat it with a hammer until it's roughly shaped the way we want it. And then we start to grind it, to refine it, to get it shaped, to make it pretty. And as you goes in and out of the fire, the impurities come out of the steel. It's very similar to what happens in our life. And on this knife, actually, I left some of the scaling on the side of the blade just to represent the those impurities and those blemishes that come out of us as a reminder. And I could have polished it all up and made it all shiny, but I left those there for that reason. And then once you get it roughly shaped and everything, then it goes through a process called normalizing. And that's where you go back in and out of the fire, a little less hot each time. And what that does, it gets all the stresses out of the steel. Because ultimately, to make this edge the right hardness, to temper the knife, it goes back into the fire, then it is quenched, just like it would be baptized. And what that does is it creates a hardness along this edge here that'll keep the blade sharp, but keeps the spine flexible enough that it doesn't break when you're in battle. Losing your temper is when you get overheated and that edge loses its hardness again. So there's a lot in a knife that you just learn about life.
Jack used to tell me that
Not
making
that anybody would lose their temper, but it's very symbolic of
making of
what
a man.
we're doing. You know, I've been researching out, not to cut into
No,
your
no,
time.
no,
I've been researching out, you know, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities in high places. And that always kind of sat weird with me because I was a soldier and fought in battle and have faced the enemy face to face. But just to make it short, I can tell you that flesh and blood and powers and principalities are not mutually exclusive. Powers and principalities work through flesh and blood. They work through people.
Yes.
And when you've done all you know to do, you have to stand. And sometimes standing is you're standing with this. But just like David when he was on the battlefield, when he saw Goliath come down, he didn't go, man, this stinks. We need to stand on the side of this hill and pray harder. He went down. And then if you look at the verbal exchange between David and Goliath, he said that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, but in powers and principalities, is basically what he said. And Goliath cursed him, and he used his own very words to curse him back. He said, no, this day I'll take your head from you and give your body to the beasts of the fields. So there's a real present tense reality to the battle that we're in. And I think I look at like what happened to Michelle. The people that get killed on the battlefield aren't the people in the rear doing nothing. It's the people on the front line. And these guys were on the front line. And this isn't the time to second guess your mission. It's not time to second guess your resolve. It's time to get angry. It's time to demonstrate enmity.
Yes.
And it's time to take the battle to the enemy.
Thank you, man.
Everybody.
Thank you. Jack talks about the Special Forces manual, close quarter combat manual that he helped author, the sniper doctrine that he helped author that currently trains our U.S. Special Forces in many areas, in addition to Halo and different things. But he says the making of a knife is like making of a man. And so how do you know this knife is tempered? Is that you can put it in a vise and bend it 90 degrees and it won't break, but it retains its edge. And so it was symbolic for me because it's the word, but it's also how I felt the day Michelle did not resurrect. It broke me. Or should I say, it bent me. But I'm not broken. And I'm thankful for the temperance that God has forged in us to do that. Okay? Did I tell you we're going to learn something fun? Les had a cool analogy with the sword. I need a volunteer quickly, preferably a big guy with strong muscles, which that disqualifies you, my friend. I'm sorry. Just kidding. Anybody, come on up. And so I want to show you one other example of the supernatural power of a word, and then we're going to move on to love, and then I'm done teaching for the day, and the rest is experiential. Hey, good to see you. So standing forward, I want you to see, if we can get the camera on, his whole body and feet. I want you to stand with your shoulder width apart, stick your hand out. And I learned this from my Krav Maga instructor about really the power of the spoken word. But I want to show you in a supernatural way how simply a spoken word can change your natural state in an instant. And so looking straight ahead towards the back of the exit with your feet pointed forward, shoulder width apart, I want you to look ahead and say the word cloud while I strike the end of your hand fairly hard.
Pow.
Clouds.
Oh, wow.
Clouds, like clouds in the sky. So say clouds.
Clouds.
Okay? Straight, say tree.
Tree.
Did you see that? Thank you. Try this with your friends. Why does that happen? Because he knows what a cloud is. And he knows what a tree is. And so Jesus said, don't be looking like up in the clouds for my return. Establish yourself on my word and be planted like a tree. So that you're unmovable, you're unshakable. Right? Supernatural power of a spoken word to change your physical state without weirdness. Amazing. Okay? So this is one last example, pseudoscience to most. My father-in-law, who's a physics instructor, will probably not like this example, but I think it's a powerful example. You can search it out. Dr. Emoto, who I'm about to reference here, would be a new age, pseudoscience practitioner. It's fine, don't discount the information from the source, okay? I happen to like him. And this was his experiment because he was developing a high-speed camera to do something that we take for granted every single day, which is if I took this water, which is at a natural state, and I began to heat it, what would happen? It would begin to vibrate at a different frequency and change states from liquid to a what? To a gas, to a vapor. What if we went the other way and we cooled it down? What would happen? Right before our eyes, this thing that we take for granted every day would change states, and while it was the same, it would be totally different, and it would become a solid. And so he wanted to capture this process on camera. So they had to develop a high-speed camera to get the exact instant when water changed from one state to another. Biblically, we would say metamorphosized, right in front of your eye. And so this is what clean water looks like in the instant that it goes from a liquid to a solid. Looks like a snowflake. Notice the connection. This is what water looks like that's been fractured and is polluted when it freezes. This is what that same fractured water looked like after vibrating the words love over it and freezing it. Notice it starts to reform. Why? Not because it's weird or metaphysical or spiritual, but because words have a resonance, a vibration that would vibrate through the water in such a way it would create this physical phenomenon. This is what the word I hate you did to the same water. Is that profound? Why this is even more profound, is that God calling on that phone? Because if it is, we'll take it, otherwise. But husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the ecclesia and gave himself up for her, cleansing her by washing her with the water of your... Why? Because guys, you're 72% water. The words you speak matter. The words you speak over your children, over your spouse, matter. They're either going to fracture them or heal them. And so Michelle and I were enamored by this, hence the work we started to publish The Supernatural Power of a Word.